before you say, isn't this going to damage the trade? Well, you know, when prime ministers have stood up for our values, whether it's human rights or religious freedom or whatever it is, we've often heard Beijing and the Chinese Communist Party shouting at that prime minister. They've shouted at me, they've shouted at others, but actually trade goes up. The reality is the Chinese are not trading with us because they're being generous. They're trading with us because they need the trade too. This isn't some sort of act of global communist generosity. It's the reality of a modern trading environment. They need the trade too. That's why they're trading with us. And so we shouldn't be sacrificing our human rights and our values and our freedom and our economy just because we think that we'll get some sort of better concession. First of all, we won't. And secondly, we'll be undermining our future.
Chancellor Rachel Reeves heads to China this week as part of a continued reset between London and Beijing.
She is due to meet He Lifeng, who is the Vice Premier of China, as part of discussions about deepening trade cooperation. But there are also, of course, concerns about human rights and what Donald Trump will want to do about China when he returns to the White House later this month. Joining us now is Tom Tugendhat, the Conservative MP and former Security Minister. Good morning.
Morning, Adam. How are you?
I'm very well. Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year.
Now, do you support this idea of having a reset with China and trying to establish closer trade relations, at least?
Look, I've always supported a relationship with China. The question is, what kind of a relationship? And I think that this level of relationship is an error, particularly as Rachel going all the way to Beijing will be received and seen in China as acquiescence to China's will and not as an equal party going to negotiate. And I think that's a mistake. I think it's a mistake for several reasons. The first is the human rights issue that you've set out. And, you know, we can talk about the Uyghur oppression in Xinjiang. We can talk about Tibet. We can talk about the repression of democracy in Hong Kong. We can talk about the erosion of religious freedom in China. But all of those are domestic issues. Let's talk about what it means in the UK. Why does it matter to people listening today? Well, jobs in the UK are being destroyed. Our economy is being undermined because of the actions of the Chinese Communist Party and its state agents here in the United Kingdom. We've seen this in the various different ways that the consulates have acted as centres of intelligence gathering or oppression. We've seen it in the ways that the Confucius Institute has been used to silence debate on our university campuses. And of course, we've seen it in the ways in which British nationals here in the United Kingdom have been threatened and in some cases, possibly even beaten up by Chinese state officials or their envoys here on our streets. So this is not a state that we can engage with in a normal way. And what Rachel's doing is she's covering that up and she's pretending that we can. And all at the same time, for 4 years now, Jimmy Lai, a British citizen, has been in prison on charges of doing exactly what you're doing now, Adam and Kate, reporting the news.
But the problem is that in economic terms, China is perhaps just too powerful for the United Kingdom. That, studies suggest that our economy is more exposed to China perhaps than even the United States economy or the European economies. And that if we were to put up the shutters, as it were, and say we're not going to do business with you because of your security stance, your defence stance, the threat you pose to us, that in the process we would ruin our own economy.
Well, first of all, Adam, I haven't called for a trade embargo. I'm not calling for one now, and that's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm suggesting is that Rachel Reeves going to China sends entirely the wrong message, just as when Keir Starmer met with the Chinese delegation at the G20 in Brazil. And you remember seeing those journalists ushered out by Chinese officials, effectively creating a normality, as it were, of being in China wherever you are in the world just because you're with the Chinese leader. Well, that's not right. You know, the British Prime Minister should be standing up for British values. And one of them, I'm sure you would agree, is freedom of the press and freedom of reporting. Now, that's not something the Chinese state is doing. That's not what Rachel Reeves is doing. So for all of her talk over years now of, trade based on human rights and all the sort of things that she signed up to when she was in opposition, she's done a remarkable 180 degrees. She's never met Jimmy Lai's family. She's not supporting British citizens. She's not defending British business. And so instead what she's doing is she's looking to offer up the British economy on a plate. Now, I don't think that's the right thing for her to do. We should have a relationship with China. It should be at official level. That's what our embassies do all the time. Our trade envoys do that all the time. We absolutely should have that relationship, but it needs to be one based on practicality. Now, just before you say, isn't this going to damage the trade? Well, when prime ministers have stood up for our values, whether it's human rights or religious freedom or whatever it is, we've often heard Beijing and the Chinese Communist Party shouting at that prime minister. They've shouted at me, they've shouted at others, but actually trade goes up. The reality is the Chinese are not trading with us because they're being generous. They're trading with us because they need the trade too. This isn't some sort of act of global communist generosity. It's the reality of a modern trading environment. They need the trade too. That's why they're trading with us. And so we shouldn't be sacrificing our human rights and our values and our freedom and our economy just because we think that we'll get some sort of better concession. First of all, we won't. And secondly, we'll be undermining our future.
Okay, now alarming report about the vulnerability of the UK in the Sunday Times this morning. We've just been speaking to Neil Kinnock, who says that he doesn't think the current target of 2.5% of GDP spent on defence is enough. He wants 3 or 4% were the figures he quoted. Do you agree with him?
Well, I think Neil's absolutely right. And it's not often you'll hear me say that, but I think he's absolutely right. But I think that actually what we need to be seeing is a radical transformation in the way the MOD and, in fact, security works. Because the idea that, you have tanks in Germany and that holds off the Soviet 14th Army or whatever, I mean, that's yesterday's thinking and it's a long way back. What we need to be doing is investing much more in technology. So whether it's drones, either in the air, like we've seen in Ukraine, or underwater, as we're seeing developed around the world, or whether it's indeed in cyber capabilities, espionage, or indeed the security provisions that keep us safe from cyber attacks here. We need to be making sure we are investing much, much more in our security. Because the truth is, Adam, the world that you and I have known for so long, that sort of peaceful era from the end of the Cold War until, well, 5, 10 years ago, it's over. The reality is Russia is invading countries in Europe. China is threatening us here. Iran is trying to kill people in the United Kingdom. And frankly, we can either take it seriously and respond appropriately and keep the British people safe, or we can just pray.
Tom Tugendhat, Conservative MP, thank you very much indeed for joining us.